little bit about me because, okay, we're definitely being recorded. Yeah, a little bit about me. I've actually been involved since just before the Rio conference in '92. I went to a conference prior to that, which was bringing all the Commonwealth countries together. And what struck me at that particular event was meeting a few people from the small island states who were actually very concerned that if the world didn't take some action, that they'd actually disappear. And sadly, some of that's already starting to happen. So 29 years have gone by, and I don't think we've done a great deal, really. We've started, but we're a long way down the track from where we should be. We should be accelerating quite fast by now. So these kinds of actions to get domestic premises up to a standard where low energy is a reality is quite a desperate situation now. We need to actually move that one on. The attempts we've made so far to encourage people have been well received, but haven't resulted in much actually happening because the technology hasn't really been there. The methodology of taking a house and actually doing it yourself is quite difficult because of the materials involved and the planning requirements and everything else. So I'm hoping tonight we'll get some very good insights into how to stop all that and get on with the job, because quite frankly, I mean, we should be able to build now housing which is very, very low energy. I mean, we've got Zbed in the borough, which is a very good example of housing and light industry working together to reduce energy consumption, water consumption and various other things. And I'm sure these things could be built into new housing stock quite easily, even if there's a slight cost. But, you know, we will find out tonight. So I don't want to drag on too much because we've got people who know what they're talking about. I only know I'd like to be in the knowledge of what they're saying. So I think we move straight into the architectural side, if we can call upon Christian to enlighten us on the architectural side of low energy. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me just check. Hopefully everyone can see my screen, and I'll start. I'm going to talk about new buildings in particular. Just to start with, as mentioned, I'm Christian Dembele. I'm an architect and a chartered engineer at Architype. I've been working there since about 2004, and we are highlighted as one of the most sustainable architectural practices in the country, having won the Architects Journal's Sustainable Practice of the Year 3 times in a row. I just wanted to start by explaining a little bit about the built environment and how that contributes to global emissions and CO2. You can see from the pie chart on the right the global CO2 emissions, and you can see that combining the ones in yellow, the building operations, which is 28%, and the building materials and construction are a further 11% of all global CO2 emissions. The built environment accounts for roughly 40% of all global emissions. And as I said, I'm mentioning this mostly talking about new buildings. And if we're talking about new buildings being built between now and 2050, when the real issues are going to be occurring, the percentage as shown on the right-hand side from operational energy, not all of which is controlled by government requirements, is only 10%. The majority of the impact is from building materials, which is 9 times greater. So I think that's something to think about, and that's not regulated at the moment, but it's something we strongly factor into our designs and think about. Another issue to raise is that building performance. Currently, we know that most buildings that are designed don't perform as they should do. That there's a 40% difference between their designed energy usage and their performance. We know that they're often difficult to control and uncomfortable, and that's becoming even more extreme with hotter weather, hotter and wetter weather, where we're getting all sorts of issues. So we design buildings with no performance gap as our intent, and have lots of POE evidence to show that from monitoring the building in use. So what can be done to challenge these things? Well, it's a great time to be talking about these things. There's actually the first Built Environment Day at the COP event tomorrow. So please do find out all about all the events that are going on tomorrow. And one of the great things I would really encourage everyone to look at is the virtual pavilion. This has got 17 really great solutions to really tackling the environmental issues. And please do go on to virtualpavilion.co and you can find out more and more. There's lots of videos, lots of diagrams and lots of drawings. I must say I'm really thrilled to say that one of those 17 global exemplars was one of the projects I worked on, the Enterprise Centre at UEA, have completed 6 years ago. It's a great project, really pushing the boundaries using natural bio-based materials sourced locally in the Norwich area and designed to Passivhaus standards. And it's a real exemplar. You can find out more about it. There's walkthroughs and talks and all about it. And that's one of the things that we've developed there as an international one. And I'm going to come on to some of the really great national products, not national award-winning schemes that we've done in Sutton in just a second. But one of the things that we have done with all of our recent projects is go for these energy efficient buildings to the gold standard of Passivhaus. This means thinking about both form and orientation, making the buildings super insulated, having no drafts or issues, and having efficient services, including mechanical heat recovery ventilation systems, which are very different to a lot of conventional buildings, and then adding on-site renewables on top of this. Architype helped bring that to the fore in the UK. It's been developed as a standard in the continent for more than 30 years. And we helped deliver some of the first projects and have delivered them right across the country, from large-scale housing schemes to archives to schools, of which I'll touch on 2 of those projects in Sutton in just 1 second. But one of the other things that has been really great about working with Sutton is their recognition of the wider aspects of sustainability. It's not just about carbon emissions. There are a lot more issues, biodiversity, health and well-being, and all of these things come together. We've had a great partnership working with Sutton Council to really push the boundary on some of these aspects, which we'll talk about now. So I'm going to talk about 2, very quickly talk about 2 exemplar buildings that I've worked and helped design over the last few years in Sutton. The first of that is Harris Academy Sutton, which was completed in 2019, and today was awarded the Spaces Building for Sustainable Building of the Year and Civic Building of the Year. And the other one is Hackbridge Zero Carbon Primary School, also completed in 2019, and was nominated as the Architects Journal Building of the Year earlier this year. So just talking through Harris Academy Sutton. First of all, to make a really energy efficient and low embodied carbon building really takes careful attention to detail on the form and the envelope and the construction. It's really important to make sure you get the design right at the earliest stages. If you don't, it's really difficult to make it work in reality. So one of the key things is making sure that you minimize the amount of surface area that you lose heat from by making bigger buildings or blockier buildings. You actually reduce the amount of surface area, which means you reduce the amount of heat loss. Your building becomes more efficient by its design. And lots of people don't really consider that, but it's a really important thing. The other thing is orientation, making sure that you're getting the design in the correct way to show that. And then, of course, construction, designing it in such a way so as to be able to be made from timber or other lightweight and low construction carbon materials. One of the other things we did centrally in our design is to make sure that nature is at the heart of it. So we designed it around the existing trees and gave great views out to planted landscapes all around. And we also increased that relationship to greenery and nature by including natural exposed timber walls and ceilings, giving that biophilia, which helps to sort of reduce stress and increase well-being. Really important in school designs, but especially important more and more as people become, especially in recent times with COVID and other things, stressed, working from home and anxiety more and more. So having a calming place is really important. The use of natural and non-toxic materials is so important. So many people build things from petrochemical based products, which release lots of toxins, VOCs and other chemicals. We pride ourselves at Architype on trying to eliminate those as much as possible using natural non-toxic products throughout. Here's some examples of the various different spaces throughout the building. And one of the other things I think it's important to do is to design your building so it's easy to use. As I mentioned, Passivhaus requires mechanical heat recovery ventilation, which is all automatic. But in order to make people use buildings sensibly and make sure that they have control of things, to avoid overheating, we've provided lots of windows so people can open the windows, get natural fresh air as and when they want to supplement it. But the advantage is that you provide them with simple instructions when it's best to open a window or to close a window, as indicated on the diagram below, and also instruction manuals to how to operate their building efficiently. Doing all of this and combining the careful thinking about daylighting and heat gains means that you can radically reduce the amount of energy that you need. Here you can see this is a huge classroom and the size of the radiator is absolutely tiny, as you can see, compared to the person. The heating system for this huge secondary school is the boilers are not much bigger than your domestic scale house boiler. There's two of them because one of them's a backup, whereas normally you'd have a whole floor full of huge plant rooms. And you can see that the energy is a display energy rated A. It's pretty much 80% reduction in energy compared to typical buildings. This is what we need to be doing, 80 to 90% on all buildings. And the school love it, and everybody really enjoys being in that space. So the second one I briefly want to just touch on is Hackbridge Zero Carbon Primary School. We started this project before Harris Academy Sutton, but due to complications with the contractor building the building, going into administration during it, it actually took longer than the other one. But we completed that at the end of 2019 as well. And that similarly is setting even higher standards on a slightly smaller scale. So first we looked at the landscape. This is right next door to BedZ, as was mentioned earlier, and we wanted to enhance that site, enhance that natural relationship with BedZ. And so we've really worked hard to increase the biodiversity of that site, giving the building green roofs and allowing access to the new wetlands around it. One of the things we've done is concentrate on internal environments, making sure that the ventilation system works well to avoid CO2 buildup so that pupils and staff can really concentrate. I can't know whether you can all remember If you've been in an office where the windows don't open and the CO2 levels, after a few minutes, everyone starts falling asleep, and it can really affect attainment. So it's really important that when we build these super insulated buildings, that we don't block the ventilation, but that we allow it to work in a heat recovery system so that you can absolutely maximize energy efficiency. And that's one thing that our studies have shown work really well here and in our other schools. As I've mentioned, so much of this is about materiality, not just operational energy. It's about embodied carbon and selecting materials which are low carbon. So the majority of this building is wood. It's timber construction. It uses recycled newspaper for insulation. You know, it's got timber cladding. Everything is wood, and I think that is the way we should be building going forward, trying to reduce concrete to as minimum location as possible. Here, that's just in the floor, just as a slab there. And so, by really concentrating on lowering energy efficiency, on improving energy efficiency, as I've discussed above, you can reduce the energy consumption down by 80 to 90%, far better than the RIBA 2030 and 2050 goals, which means that it's actually then suitable to use renewable energy technologies to power the whole of the building 100%. So in this simple two-storey primary school, we've been able to provide PVs on the roof as well as a green roof and generate all the electrical needs. We've also got a ground source interseasonal heat pump, which provides all of the heating and cooling from below ground. So this building should generate more energy than it consumes, which has got to be the way we design our buildings in the future. So thank you very much for the opportunity to really talk about some of these great buildings that are in Sutton, and I hope that's been of help.
Les, you're still on mute. Les, can you hear me? You're still on mute.
Do you want me to jump in with the next presentation?
I'm back, sorry.
Here we go.
I don't know what happened there. The mute for the mic is right by another control and it just flicked the screen. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Christian. That's what I wanted to say. Really good to see that BedZ's been augmented by another very, very low energy location. I think that was very useful. But we're going to move on to John now, John Warren, and look at refurbishment of housing. That's correct, isn't it, John?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah, so good to meet you all virtually, and thanks for having me on. We've got a couple of live projects in Sutton at the moment. Yeah, I thought I'd tell you a bit more about EnergieSprong and what we're doing with the projects in Sutton. So just a little bit about EnergieSprong and where it came from. It's got a bit of a weird name. EnergieSprong means energy leap in Dutch, and this picture kind of encapsulates where it all started, really. So you can see the house on the left and the house on the right, which has been retrofitted. And the Dutch parked these cars outside one day and said, you know, why is it that that the house on the left is like the car on the left? You know, nobody's invested in it since the 1970s. It's cold, drafty, inefficient. But why is it that people are willing to go out and spend money on a car and pick up the nice black car on the right? What is triggering that sort of behavior that we're not seeing in houses, and we're not seeing in retrofit especially? What can we learn from the way cars are built and the package for consumers is put together that we could bring into the retrofit market? So they came up with some kind of guiding factors which would enable people to kind of really start putting their hand in their pocket and upgrading their homes, and they came up with these. So people want a house that's better than an old home that's better than a new home. They want it to be warm and comfortable every day. They want it to be affordable, and so that might mean paying no more for energy and maintenance that you did before, and perhaps a guarantee around that. Factory built, so really high quality and modern methods of construction, and able to be financed by savings. And of course, we've got to be net zero energy, and you know, very nearly net zero emissions. So really, you know, how can we get all of that using some of the approaches in other industries? And off they went in 2010. And built some of those pilot homes, and this is a project in Arnhem that they built in about 2016-17, hundreds of houses. You can see them being put together there, and really expanded into a number of different sectors. Here's a multi-story housing project, also net zero, that completed a few years ago, and they've completed 8,000 homes under the EnergieSprong approach now in the Netherlands, and there's teams in France, Italy, Germany, and over in North America doing similar stuff to what we're doing in the UK to try and scale up retrofit. So closer to home, you might have seen pictures of this project that we completed in the Netherlands. That was completed with Nottingham City Homes, so a bit like Sutton Housing Partnership and Almo with their builder, an SME called Melius Homes. 10 completed homes in 2018, another 46 added last year, and hundreds to follow. So really, you know, using that original design and repeating that and scaling up in Nottingham quite nicely. Another project over in Essex, 5 homes, some technical pilots completed under some quite stringent planning rules here. So we needed to complete the homes and make sure that they look pretty much like, or as close as we could make them to the original homes, whilst hitting the kind of net zero standards that we need to get to. And then there was another batch of homes, some more social houses over in Devon, 3 landlords over there, 16 homes that are now completed, and there's another phase of work underway there. So back to Sutton. Here's a project from last year. These are up on the Coulsdon estate. They're a tricky design called a Unity non-traditional building. So it's kind of a steel frame with a block structure between that. And we've done some technical pilots now 5 completed homes up there with a wrap system, an insulated wrap system, insulation in the roof to a very, very high standard. Solar PV, you can just see it in the picture at the bottom there. And those are completed and are undergoing testing as we speak. There's a few more pictures here from the rear, and you can see the PV, some of the equipment. These homes quite spacious, really. So plenty of room for some of the equipment in the adjoining outbuildings. So you can see some of the equipment that we've put in there: an air source heat pump, a new water tank, and some of the it's just off the picture there, but some of the PV inverter and everything like that has gone into these homes up in Coulsdon. Moving on, so we're going to do a follow-on up in Coulsdon, another 15 homes, just to test kind of a version 2 of the product, and start getting the cost of the solution down. Moving over to the St Helier estate, these are some more prototypes that we are now on site with over in St Helier. I think Sutton Housing Partnership has over 2,000 homes on that particular estate. We're starting with 6 technical pilots and hope to roll to a further 60 homes next year. This is these are smaller houses, so you know, space is even more precious. So we're using a kind of pod design for the front of the home there, which will obviously provide a small porch area, but with some of the equipment in there. All of the low carbon equipment, so the PV inverters and the the heat pumps. So everything's in that pod. So we're not taking away any space from the resident. So those are going live as we speak for the first technical pilots, and then we're rolling out with some scale next year. Little bit more detail. Obviously, with these pictures, you can see a little bit more of what's going on inside the home. So there is these are all ventilated homes because the air tightness and the insulation is so good. The ventilation of the home has to be carefully considered, and any heat recovered and nice filtered airs now or planned to go into these homes. And you see some of the ductwork, which looks a bit like spaghetti, but you know, a lot of these a lot of the ductwork is being pre-manufactured, so it can just simply be brought into the home and fitted to the ceiling, mainly in the kind of in the circulation areas or in the porch itself. So you won't see too much of that once it's complete, but you can see some of the insulation in there and the airtight membrane in the walls. So all of that's going in and should deliver the net zero result. So how are we doing this? Going back to the approach, we've got a performance specification. So we're asking for we're asking the market for a completely different product here. We're asking for a very, very high level of performance, and we're saying to the supply chain, look, we need the quality. We don't want to intrude on people. It needs to be affordable, and we need to get that design factor right. So the neighbours are jealous, people, and this whole thing scales up. And there's no barriers, or people really want and desire to have this retrofit solution. So we've set a really high performance standard, and encouraging people really to move to a way of thinking about a retrofit as a product rather than a series of trades or a series of measures that are fitted to a home. Key focus is a focus on people throughout. So we need to change to be able to offer a product that people want. So we're very clear that they can heat their home to 21 degrees all year. They get 40 minutes of hot water for showers. They get a plug load allowance to run their appliances, and a guarantee that the home's going to feel good and sound good. So there's not going to be any noises from any of this new equipment we're putting in. So we're going for guaranteed comfort, and we're going to be replacing or taking out gas completely, and applying a fixed monthly cost, and they'll still remain in control of their electricity bill, but they get this absolute guarantee that they'll never pay more than they did before, and normally people end up with a slightly warmer home too. Business case, so we're working with social landlords exclusively at the moment, whilst we get that scale going and reduce the costs. And this is how we're doing it in terms of the business case before, is that tenants would pay their rent to the housing provider or Sutton Housing Partnership, and they pay their energy bill to the utility company. And then every so often, Sutton Housing Partnership would come along and replace doors, windows, redo insulation and other parts on the home. What we're trying to do with the EnergieSprong model is shrink that energy bill from the kind of large triangle, so maybe £1,200 a year, to something more like £500 or £600 a year. Introduce an additional charge to the tenant, which would essentially replaces the gas bill with something that's a bit less, and then use the rent and the comfort plan together to put a package of investment together, which will scale up the ability to fit more and more homes. So we're really going for the self-financing model with this, so that we don't have to rely on subsidies forevermore, and really get something going that self-finances itself, and use some of that business as usual spending to pay for some of the retrofit costs. So we've got a business case that we're working through with social landlords. And then additionally, we're encouraging people to move to more industrialized methods of production. So I think somebody was quoted the other day saying we need 1 million more skilled jobs for retrofit, but with the EnergieSprong approach, sure, we're going to need more homes, but we're trying to move as much of the production into factories as possible, so it's more productive and there's less of this demand for new skills. And then finally, this is where we're at the moment. We're trying to start the market and create that early market, and we're working with progressive landlords such as Sutton Housing Partnership and another 6 or 7 boroughs across London and wider across the UK. We're working with the supply companies to kind of challenge what they're doing and build production capability to create the scale we need. And then we're also kind of twisting government's arm as well and saying, hey, we need a more ambitious standard for retrofit. We're going to need some money to get this off the ground, and we're going to need some policy changes to make sure that we can really push this beyond the social market and expand into the private sector. So that's it from me, and that's kind of all about EnergieSprong and what we're doing in Sutton.
Thanks for that, John. I'm not sure whether we've got Russell with us yet.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, hello, Russell. Have you heard some of that last presentation?
I heard the whole lot.
The whole lot? Oh, thank you.
In fact,
Well, Russell is our last speaker for today, and he's looking at not-for-profit cooperatives to provide retrofit work in the UK on a grander scale. Hopefully, he's learned something from refitting his own home, and he'll pass on some of those tips to us tonight. So I'll hand it straight over to you, Russell.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, the good news is I've heard John's presentation about 8 times, so I didn't need to listen to all of it. But it's good. It's all the stuff that's happening in Sutton's very exciting. So, can you guys see my screen? Yep, brilliant. Okay, well, let's press the button and go then. So yeah, hi, I'm Russell Smith. I'm founder and director of Retrofit Works. It's a not-for-profit co-op. I'll go into a bit of how it works, but I want to sort of talk about the beginnings of it really, and why we bothered setting it up. And it was because I did my home up in Sutton about 20 years ago, and I see some friendly faces on the call here who I've known for a while, who some of which have been in this house. So I'm a chartered civil engineer really. I shouldn't be doing anything like this at all. And I renovated my own home, and I found it shocking that I couldn't really get any advice on how to minimise my carbon footprint. And no matter where you went, it was super hard. There was a lot of quite interesting things happen, probably from Christian's colleagues in new build, but really nothing in the retrofit space at all at that particular stage. So it turns out that this is one of the first times anyone's ever had a go at a deep retrofit in the country, which was massively depressing. What I did was have a go at lots of different things to just basically try and learn how it all worked really. Actually, you're probably looking at the notes screen here, aren't you? So I'm going to swap them over. So in essence, there's a whole bunch of things in this particular property, which I'm going to stop sharing and share again. Now I wanted to test a number of things out, and at that stage it was just applying a lot of different things, putting some monitoring equipment into the building and really understanding how it would all work for the long term, including costs, ability to install it, the capability of a local supply chain to understand what I was talking about, that kind of thing. And through the course of doing this work over 3 years, I had about 3,000 people come and look at the house. You kind of put these things together and you realize, oh, okay, there's a whole bunch of people that know nothing about it, but are really interested in it. Well, there's a business here. So I started my own company called Parity Projects, which is still kicking around. And we started advising homeowners on how to do this kind of thing. To give you a flavour for the sort of things that I did in the building, lots of different types of insulation, new windows, underfloor heating. This is the photo here is of a maskless recycled newspaper sprayer, spraying the wood fibre in between the timber joists that I'd installed at the time. There's a biomass boiler put in there, solar thermal on the roof. And I didn't ignore the fact that water is an issue. At the time, Southeast Sutton and Southeast Water were wasting around about 90 litres per head per day just from leaks, and the target for total use per head was 90 litres per head per day. So it was we're having a go at trying to do as many things as possible. So I actually reduced the water consumption, and there was a meter installed the day I moved in. Reduced the water consumption by 90%, and I got my heating bill down to £50 a year. And it was really just through working it all out for myself, and a very embryonic piece of software to work out what I needed to do that really put me on the road to starting things off. And there's a picture of that particular room at the back end of typically at the back end of a Victorian house, you'll see a sort of an outleg of the house, but it's just insulation. That's how these buildings need to be treated. Sadly, I know there's been some requests. This isn't a training course on how to renovate a house. This is a talk on how to get every house in the country renovated. So the philosophy is taking this approach, and that's the beauty of how we can, as long as we understand how the building's performing right now and what it could be. And as well, and to some extent, you've got to take some notice of how people would like to use a building, but they may move, so the next person might have a different lifestyle. We can think about how to take things forward. Now, these are, again, 40 houses in Sutton, all around the Newtown conservation area on Lind Road, and they're all built within 5 years of each other. They're all in the same part of the country, so the weather's the same. And this is our modelling of the energy consumption. So the size of the pie is relative to the annual bill, and what the pie is made up of, you can see as in the key on the left there. There is no one house there that is like any other. And if you carry out an EPC on these houses, the automated recommendations would give you pretty much the same thing as a top 3 things to do with your building. They'd all be the same, and they'd all be wrong. So really, this is about saying to you, looking at your building and listening to it, and it will tell you what it needs if you're looking hard enough. So for this building here, if you can see the cursor, 39% of the energy consumption of that building is to do with heat loss through the external walls. That is a slam dunk for external wall insulation. This one over here, 27% of the energy consumption of that building is to do with heating and efficiency. So just a terrible boiler, probably been in there for 20 years. Somebody really loves it. It never goes wrong, mate. It's 40% of that gas is being used on nothing at all. So it's about understanding what the house needs. Now, where we came from, now I've been giving advice for people for a very long time on how to do this with the building, but there was no market. I mean, John as well mentioned just now, EnergieSprong is a great solution for trying to get the market moving. We're all having a go at our bit. Now, there are plenty of customers out there that would quite like to do this, but they aren't being offered anything that's attractive. They're not aware of necessarily even of the benefits. And even if they were, they don't have the confidence in the supply chain to actually get on with this stuff. And, you know, rather depressing saying this 20 years they've been in the game. The supply chain as well have got the capabilities, but they really haven't got the confidence to do this. They don't really invest in themselves, they don't do the training, and they certainly wouldn't promote this because they don't really know what they're doing, so they'd rather just do business as usual. If they do, however, we find people are coming forward and saying, yeah, I'd like to get into this, but they really need lots and lots and lots of help to get into this particular type of work. And we're coming increasingly up against groups that really want to do more of this kind of thing. So charities, community energy co-ops, local authorities, some landlords, they really want to drive the change, but sometimes I struggle trying to identify the people that really need it, particularly if they feel poor. But they really have no ability to really define a reliable supply chain, engage with them properly to make this kind of stuff happen. So Retrofit Works sits in the middle, and it's owned by the advocates, and it's owned by the supply chain to design what it would take for a local area to be decarbonised. And increasingly now as well, I put finance at the bottom here, there is no shortage of money to lend into the home improvement sector. The problem the finance providers have got is they don't trust any of the models. Christian mentioned earlier on the design gap between design and actual performance. That's one of the things that's acutely worried about. And we're all trying to work towards a point where we're super confident in what we can do. We can prove to customers that they've actually got the savings that they've been promised, and then they just tell all their mates and it starts to go like wildfire. We're a long way away from that. So Retrofit Works works on the basis that you have a bunch of people that represent householders for what their motive might be. So there are some people that are cold, they just need a house that's just that gives them a right to live in a comfortable home. Some people, they're moving on, that they want to renovate, they want to invest for the long term. Some people have health problems, some people want to save the planet. That's all. There's lots of different reasons to install a bit of loft insulation. So why don't we engage with them in the way that they want them to be engaged with? And all those people can be a variety of organisations out there that meet them at the moment that they're willing to listen to the advice. The supply chain, we call them vetted. The practitioners can't join our co-op unless they can prove that they can actually do the work, or they're willing to go through a series of training courses that we've got for them to get to the point where we're willing to give them some work. And then in the middle of all that, we put machinery, but we've got some online tendering portal. So in other words, if a customer comes to us and wants some loft insulation, we could go out to 10 to 3 local companies through our platform. We've got access to finance and grants when they're available. And we're working on some low interest finance with a couple of banks right now. And we've got access to regular CBD training. And now Retrofit Works is an accreditation scheme as well. So we are able to accredit retrofit coordinators to work in this space as well. So the model works by, because the practitioners and advocates own the cooperative, we have an open book policy to the way we charge. So in other words, we agree a percentage value of the value of the work that goes through, and that gets effectively Retrofit Works invoices contractors to that agreed percentage across the retrofit scheme. So what's the challenge in the retrofit of a single dwelling? We've heard quite a lot of things from the other two speakers today about the things that make a good building, and that's I'm not going to dwell on that anymore. The bottom line is, and back to my earlier point, this is about having a good offer for a householder. Individual householders, which make up around about 75% of the housing stock of the UK. So these are individual clients that spend money on their own property, and you need to convince them to take the first step. All of that full list of things you see on the left-hand side there will constitute a constituent part of an offer. Many people, the builders in particular, they'll offer you a price to do some work, and it'll be one line on a contract and expect you to sign it, and there's the price. Oh, 35 grand, and there's one line on the letter. All of these things really are things that householders will want to react to know that they're confidently signing up to something and spending their money wisely. The things that go on, let's point a couple out here. Communication between all parties is the number one thing that usually means a particular project will fall apart. People on site at the same time as each other aren't necessarily, the householders are not necessarily understanding what contractors are offering them, or explain, and not being explained very well when things aren't going quite right on site. Everybody falls out mainly because they just don't quite speak the same language. These are all things we need to convince people to engage in, and we need to find a route through to bridging those problems in order for the entire country to be renovated. This is all about the offer. How do we make a good offer to everybody? So it's kind of like a mass customization. For those buildings that wouldn't suit John's EnergieSprong type approach, we need to be able to look at ways, particularly for buildings that might be in conservation areas, where we can really work with the grain of the way the industry is operating right now. And the Retrofit Coordinator is an absolutely essential part of all this. They're quite a new role within the industry. It's a qualification to get it. They're energy competent. They design buildings, and they can understand how buildings work very well, but they're not a designer. They're coordinating designers. They're coordinating contractors. They're coordinating the householder. They're making it all work. They're the gravy that make all this kind of stuff really work. But they have to be commercially savvy as well, because they need to spot the contractors taking the mickey, or the price isn't good enough, or they're going too slow or whatever. So they need to be able to spot all that stuff, so they're a trusted advisor to make all that work. And if you want to know more about that, there's a standard out now called PAS 2035, which is very boring to read, but really quite advanced in the way the industry operates. It's not just what to do, it's how to do it, what stages, what assurances should you seek at each particular stage. when should things be signed off, what kind of expert should sign it off, that kind of thing. Now, the first time we really got going as Retrofit Works was with this £4.5 million field poverty programme from the GLA, and we renovated 1,217 properties over the course of 18 months. But hardly any of them were in Sutton, by the way, all over London, but Sutton really were picking up the phone. Great, more than just over 70% of those customers were vulnerable, which makes the role of the Retrofit Coordinator absolutely critical, because vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean somebody with some kind of a health problem. Vulnerable means that they don't quite understand what's going on, or they might not have had any experience like this before. A coordinator really bridges that gap and helps them to get through it. Even if it takes a little bit longer, as a not-for-profit, we can do that. We can take the time with people. And you might expect a scheme like this on the stats for previous schemes that we run all over the country and Europe, between a 30 and 50% dropout rate. We had less than 5% because we were taking the time to take people on the journey. So we're transferring all the lessons from that from the able to pay market now, which is what we were really first designed for. And we've got 3 schemes that were launched 3 years ago. Warmer Sussex, Ecoferb, which is across all of London right now, and Cozy Homes Oxfordshire, and the geographies in the name there. And I'm going to just show you a few secrets of how this works and how it might apply to Sutton. We model every single address in the area that we're working in before we start. That enables us to understand buildings and to know how we can target in a marketing sense with an offer of people we know, so that these people actually react to something that they actually genuinely want to buy. And also, using the same database, if you've got every individual dwelling, we provide a platform for householders to log on to their own building so that they can actually look at how there might be some benefits to that. For Sutton, if we've already modelled every address in Sutton, in fact, we've done it for all of London. Here are some figures to how you might be able to get a grip of what's going on in Sutton right now. So there's 84,384 properties. Now here's the curve of the EPC band. The maximum energy bill at the moment is around about £6,000 a property. That must be something enormous in South Cheam or something. And you know, majority of them are houses, a large number of flats. That's a significant proportion. Not necessarily for London. As you go further into London, then you find the proportion of flats goes up. In addition, to give you an idea of the sort of properties you've got here, this is just a map of Sutton and the number of properties you would get within what's called lower super output areas. So groups of 500 or so dwellings, but you can see the density gives you an idea of the density of the properties we've got here. When you talk about density here, you might be wanting to talk about not just insulation and swapping a boiler, you might be talking about district heating as well, and how you can lay pipes in the road to be able to have one big boiler or one big heat source, or ground source heat pump or whatever, to be able to hit a number of buildings that makes those buildings much more effective to get towards net zero. But in terms of investment, this is so with our software, we run scenarios on how to get to net zero. The figure we've got at the moment for getting Sutton to net zero, the housing stock of Sutton to net zero is £2.3 billion, and that's one borough. That's the size of the challenge we've got here financially. What sort of work's required? Well, a big proportion of that is in the individual dwellings, heating and hot water. Around about another big chunk of that, 50% of the heating will be insulating walls. And you know, so these are big numbers here. And it gives you a really good idea of the sort of thing that we need to be thinking hard about in order to get the whole borough done. And a bit more detail here. Let's not forget the ventilation needs to go in as well. The sort of wall types that we need to be dealing with here. Large numbers of cavity walls are still empty. Lots of solid walls there. £36 million need to be raised in order to insulate the solid walls in the borough. Lots of empty lofts. Quite a few flat roofs to do, but there's £30 million of loft insulation to do. I mean, and people think this is something that's done. Drafts of ventilation here. There's a good sort of £8 to £9 million worth of draft proofing and ventilation to be put into buildings right now as well. So that's all there and available. Given this is being recorded, I'd urge you to go back and have a little tinker with some of those. But I just want to give you a little flash through about our online platform. So if you go to our London service, ecoferb.com, you'll be able to look at the what we call Plan Builder. You can log on to your own property, put your address and postcode in, see what measures have already been put into the building. If you've done more than the software says, you can update it. The software recalculates. And then you can start plonking things into your building, whether they be SLC pumps or solar panels or internal water insulation. And you can see what your energy bills go down and the cost of that work go up. You know, that's that point you can engage with an advisor to talk about how you can get that done. And that's white labeled. So if you wanted to run a Sutton scheme, you could just put your own logos on this and have it as a whatever you wanted to call it, saving Sutton's energy or whatever. But the next stage is always to get an expert into the home to produce a report to show you exactly what is going on with the house, where your energy bills are being allocated, and give you a route through to net zero. So our customer journey is very much to be able to make sure when we're working as a co-op, we can go to an area, we can work with advocates and the contractors, and we go through a steady process to make sure everyone is aware of what their roles are. And the key thing, though, is we do have to charge customers at each of these stages in case they decide they're not going to go ahead. In the long term, when there's volume, we might not have to do that. It was all dependent on volume. Every single thing is right now. But I do want to go on to one slide here. I recently wrote a national retrofit strategy for the Construction Leadership Council, and I think this is potentially where John might have heard the large number of tradespeople that might be needed to come into the sector. This is a figure for the whole country, and effectively you can see the number of people working in the industry right now is around about 180,000, based on relatively, if using existing skills and not the EnergieSprong approach and not some future technology that might come in, such as scanning of buildings to do your surveying and all this kind of thing. We're looking at about 400,000 new tradespeople to come into the sector. I do expect that figure to significantly come down as we get better at doing this and more technologies and learnings come into the sector. But that's our, if you like, worst case scenario. But it does, worst case, it does get worse if the government continues to fart around and not put proper measures in place to get the country renovated. So every year we delay, given we've got a hard stop of 20, we've put 2040 here, in line with the IPCC's recommendations, you're adding about another 25,000 people to the total that are needed to hit that deadline. So for any local area, this kind of model, so it's a not-for-profit, it can bring all the customer engagement experience and tools, customer journey templates, the financial model, business case that's worked in. The Cosy Homes Oxfordshire scheme is now in profit, even without any government incentives and no interest loans. But very, very keen to work with local organisations to develop a brand, make sure the customer journey works for the local area, working with community groups to devise a customer journey. But unfortunately, of course, it costs money to get it all set up. So often, if there is an avenue for raising some capital that can be paid back over time once the business case is up and running, then it's all there for the taking, really. It's just about deciding to take the first step. There is a video on our website if you want to have a look. It's only about 4 minutes long. It really explains it probably better than I've just done about how it works, but there's some other ways of getting in touch if you wanted to, and I'm looking forward to some questions.
Okay, well that was interesting, Russell. Slightly different to our first two presenters, that more in the management coordination side than the actual design and implementation. We seem to be fairly quiet at the moment on questions, Sarah.
We are, so I do encourage people to pop your questions in the box or raise a hand. I have a question if you want me to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, by all means.
So I am hoping to move house within the next year, and I just wondered, for those that are moving house, are there anything we should be looking for when out property hunting in terms of style of properties or decades architecturally for something that is a bit more achievable for retrofitting?
Okay, who wants to take this one then? It won't be Christian, that's for sure.
In all honesty, any building can get there. It's just some of them are a bit harder than others. So I would personally think, having moved a couple of times in recent years, pick somewhere where you want to live, and then find a house that you like and get someone to help you. But solid walled houses that might be in a conservation area are a complete pain in the bum. There's very little you can do externally. There's plenty you can do internally, that house I did in Carshalton Grove all those years ago, it was all internal. And it's all possible, but it's more hassle. But if you're just moving into the house, that's the time to do it.
Mm.
You'll find as soon as you've been there a year, even if it was crap when you first moved in, you start to get used to it. So just get on with it as soon as you move in. And I think there's some really interesting proposals coming out that will encourage people to do that kind of work when they first move in. They've been talked about for years, but I think they're starting to gain traction now on stamp duty rebates. If you're able to get your property up 2 or 3 stages on the EPC scale, you'll get a rebate on your stamp duty, which I think's a no-brainer. But obviously the Treasury worrying about money coming in have a different idea. So yeah, if it's in an area where perhaps our online tool is operational, then just have a look at that. Put the postcode in, find the house, have a little play with the energy model before you bought it, and see what's possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thoughts come to mind there. If you're selecting a house and you want it to be energy efficient in the condition it's already in, then obviously things like semis and terraced houses offer less external space, as Christian was saying earlier on about reducing the external losses by compacting the building as such. Well, the terrace obviously does that because you've got 2 walls instead of 4, and okay, you've got your roof, but that's a substantial saving because 30% goes through the walls. So if you've only got 2 walls instead of 4, immediately you've got some warmth. And experience has shown me over the years that the time I spent in a terraced house was very, very much cheaper than going into a semi or a detached house, which became a lot more expensive to run. But obviously materials are getting better. But if you've got to put those materials in, again, if you've got more walls, you've got more material. So again, it's a case of what suits you as a premises. And then once you've got a premises that suits, you can look at the possibilities of improvements to bring this eco thing down. But has anybody got any sort of general comment on heat pumps and that sort? Because that's obviously a theory that's around, but how big a heat pump is to actually get some benefit?
There is also.
Oh, there's a chat.
So we've just we're in the process of installing 250 heat pumps for bays as part of a it's called the electrification of heat project. And Tansy's question there about are they noisy? Well, they're not silent. But if you I just bought a house with one of a 10-year-old heat pump in it, and it clatters like an old Model 4T. But actually, if you buy one that's pretty new, they are really impressive in the noise that they make. But it is about sighting as well. If you put one under an open window and you sleep in that room, you're going to hear it. However, if it's sighted correctly and put in a sensible place, then yeah, you'd struggle to hear it. I grew up on a main road in Hackbridge, and I used to sleep through all the lorries going in and out of the industrial estate there. So it's what you get used to after a while as well. So I think people panic about all sorts of things without necessarily thinking about the fact that it will be something that gets into their veins, and they get used to it eventually. The thing about heat pumps, given it's sort of the thing that's getting everyone excited at the moment, is that you have to make sure it's designed properly. That's where all the effort goes in my view. You can chuck kit to the house to the cows come home. And I don't just mean design the air source heat pump itself. I mean design the house and whether the two are compatible. If you speak directly to an air source heat pump engineer, they will design your heating system to fit your house. It's whether they should or not is the question. That's why we'd always recommend somebody that's going to evaluate the whole house in the first instance and get your house heat pump ready to make sure the insulation levels and air tightness levels are such that you're actually getting a smaller heat pump And obviously one of the key things is the radiators need to be a little bit bigger than perhaps you would normally expect for a gas boiler, because the water temperature running around your circuit is a lot lower. But the chances are your heating engineer's probably oversized everything, so you'll probably be okay.
There's another related question on the list there from Bex, who's asking whether heat pumps, do they always require a hot water cylinder, because their current combi boiler doesn't need one and they've actually reused the space.
Afraid so, and that it will need a thermal store. Well, that's where John's lovely big porches come in, because you can put all that stuff in an insulated space. So they've thought of that. A lot of people do have those problems. So yeah, sorry, that's the future.
You want to comment on that, John?
Yeah, we've done a couple of projects, in Sutton, and yeah, we realise how precious. We've had combis have been a rip-roaring success over the last 20 years, and people have just got used to having that extra space in their home, and they just don't want to give it up. There's a question in here about what's the main motivator, but certainly with the first pilots that we ran in Sutton, the main demotivator was when we were asking people to lose a bit of their, either lose a bit of their airing cupboard or lose a bit of their outbuilding space. So, we've very quickly made sure that that's catered for with the pods, and and hopefully, with the porch pod idea, we're giving them a little bit of a amenity as well. At least somewhere to hang a coat and put your shoes. So, there's killing two birds with one stone with that one. And I'll answer the question about motivators as well. I mean, it is incredibly diverse what motivates people to retrofit their homes. People who really want to feel, that they're net zero or self-sufficient, or ready or doing their bit for 2050 climate targets. There's plenty of people who just want to feel warmer, or have, they can't afford to heat their whole house, so they've got kids doing the homework all in, piling into one room and heating one room. So the warmth thing is a big motivator. And then there's people who quite fancy a new electric oven rather than having their old gas one, or a slight a newer facade on their house, or that sort of thing as well. So we're really trying to make sure that we tap into all of those motivators and avoid those demotivating parts of retrofit.
So, okay, now moving on, there's a few questions on there that are talking about external insulation, and also advice on how to extend the building, what materials to employ during that extension. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's back to you, John, or it might be Christian that wants to answer that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got much more to offer than back to my pods. You could have a really big pod from one of the supply chain that we work with, but I'm not a materials guy, and on the extensions, I mean, we can get bathroom pods and other extension pods that are built to some super high standards and really efficiently. So that might be a way. That's not a common way to do it. So I think I'll defer to maybe Christian on better ways to do that.
I sense that could be a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just suggest, I think if you're doing any extension, you really need to think about the whole building. As Russell and John were talking about before, you can just build a new extension, but whilst you're getting those works done, it's worthwhile considering the whole building. And in terms of materials being used, it's great to select low carbon materials, but obviously you need to consider the context of that. If you're doing an extension near a neighbour's property, you have to think about fire regulations and all sorts of things. So that will be the determiner, in certain parts of what you can build, as well as planning requirements, depending on, whether you're in a conservation zone or various other areas. So yeah, I think we should be designing buildings not to minimum building regulation standards, though. We should be going a lot further. We will never hit anywhere close to our climate targets if we just build to minimum building regulations Part L. You know, that we've been designing buildings 20 years ago that supersede, you know, the current requirements, and unfortunately there's very little you know, requirement to retrofit your whole building at the same time. So you can have a very energy efficient extension and the rest of your building continue to leak energy, be uncomfortable, and cause all sorts of issues with moisture migration from warm spaces to cold spaces, because you've made a super insulated new extension and not tackled your main building. So it's really worthwhile getting specialist advice, getting it sorted properly, and yeah, you know, if you're doing works, it makes sense to try and make the whole building as good as possible at that same time.
I'll pick up on that particular point. I think one of the key things we need to be able to do, if we want to get literally 27.5 million buildings renovated, is to go with the grain of the industry. So it'd be lovely if we had building regulations that force the issue, but the best time to get this stuff done is not to say, oh, I'm going to insulate my house. It's what work am I doing, and just make sure that those things are done as I'm doing it. The amount of kitchens that are getting fitted on solid walls that should have been insulated before the kitchen in them, all that kind of stuff. That's the way we ought to do it. So anybody you know that is an electrician, heating engineer, kitchen fitter, plumber, they might be lifting floors every day and they could be insulating that floor. It's a massive missed opportunity, and we'd really be making significant progress if we were taking up those opportunities.
Okay, there's what seems to be a fairly obvious answer to a question, but the question is from Gay, sorry. If you were retrofitting a house, would you ever put in or keep a gas boiler? One for you, John, I think, probably on that one.
I mean, the simple answer is no. I think for our retrofits, the heat demand is so low. I mean, yeah, it pains me when we've had to throw out a fairly new gas boiler or get it recycled for parts. You know, that's feels like a bit of a crime. But yeah, I mean, the gas boilers are generally, the output is so high that they are running inefficiently in something that's so efficient as an EnergieSprong home. We are, with what we're looking at with flats now, is that you know, we might have a mixture of private and social tenants in a block of flats, and so you know, we can't obviously afford to replace all the private homes as well as spend, you know, social funds on the social flats. So we are looking at options where, you know, private householders would get a fabric upgrade as part of the way that block is treated, and then, you know, some options to, you know, if they really do want to keep hold of their gas boiler, then we can't force a heat pump on them. So we're looking at ways of making that work, but you know, we really we'd never put in a gas boiler.
Does that answer your question adequately, Gay?
Sorry, can I just unmute? Yes, it does to a certain extent, but I was also thinking about the beginnings of, I understand, of green gas from grass, and so I'm thinking if the gas is from that source, it then is much more benign than the fossil fuel gas. That was where I was coming from. But
I see, yeah, and yeah, we're not planning for. We don't think it's likely. There's a range of opinions on this, but we don't think it's likely that we'll see a lot of, you know, fully decarbonised green gas, biogas, and hydrogen in people's homes. We think that you know, that's an incredibly flexible fuel source that might end up more in you know, uses in transport and industry. So we're not expecting green gas to be a common fuel source, if at all, in the UK. So that's why we're very much looking at, super efficiency and heat pumps in what we're doing.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that, John. There's one here for Russell from Katrina, looking at the point about kitchens and saying, can you work just to insulate one room at a time as you can afford it? Does this help in the process?
You certainly can. In fact, that's kind of how I did my house in Sutton in the first place. And it does take even more care, though, to design in the details to make sure that you're avoiding, in particular, something we call thermal bridging. If you have bits of insulation that butt up against each other, chances are there's a structural element that butts up to another structural element. And even if that's timber, that will leak heat much more than the insulation around it. So it's very hard, but it can be done. And given that we're working with budgets and hassle and all that kind of stuff, it's probably the way that a lot of buildings will get done, unless you've got the ability to wrap the whole building in one go on the outside. The bottom line is we need to get over the particular hump of having the finances being a problem. And once we've got over that particular issue, we can do a hell of a lot. I think you look at the two ends of the spectrum of how we're going to get the whole country renovated. At the moment, it's the willing and the curious having a go and spending their money, even if they don't necessarily know what the outcome's going to be. The next stage will be people piling in that want to do a bit more of it as they see more evidence and finance comes along. But if everyone is still very slow, we're going to get to a point where climate change is really biting, and the government, we're going to have to say, guys, right, this street's getting done. We've set up some porta cabins in the local rec, and we're starting here and we're going down there, and everything's going to be beige. What do we want to choose? What do we want to choose? It's really going to get to that. I think it's about the offers from my perspective there. Having some really exciting offers that will probably include some kind of zero interest finance or non-dodgy equity release or something like that will make the whole thing work. And obviously the sort of thing that John and EnergieSprong are offering, energy performance guarantees on the performance of the building, that is brilliant. That's the way people are buying cars right now, isn't it? PCP dealing with a car over a period of years, it's the same thing. It's just your home that you've lived in for a while. So it's going to take a few more examples and videos of people with smiley faces and not wearing a blanket anymore to convince us to do it. But I think we've got the commercial one. That's why I spoke a bit more about the commercial side of it and how to deliver this. Technically, we know what to do. It's really all about deployment now and how we can encourage people to work together to try and make something happen locally.
Okay, well, while we're on the subject of finance, Russell, you had actually got a question for Christian, I think. You were interested in how the finance was arranged for Hackbridge School.
Well, I went to Hackbridge Primary School.
Oh, okay.
So I thought I want to ask, because it was a bit of a dump when I was there, how did we manage to get the money to get it done up?
So the Hackbridge Primary School you went to still exists. So it's built. This is an expansion of it, so it's another one. So it was financed, I think, through the local council. So Sutton Council funded that as part of their expansion programme. So I guess the question that's being asked is, was it significantly more expensive to build this zero carbon building than the other? Well, it was it's on the edge of the metropolitan open land. So in order to gain planning permission, we had to demonstrate this really high ambition of a zero carbon building. And so that formed the basis of it. And so it's difficult to know what the final outturn costs on the project were, because, as I say, the contractor went bust. So that sort of muddies the water during the process. But, typically our Passivhaus schools that we've designed have not been significantly more. The Passivhaus Trust estimates sort of around 5% cost increase. We've delivered ours for no cost increase on many projects, because actually it's about designing a good quality building. The cost is merely making sure that the contractor has the right skills and aptitude. There's very little difference in terms of the requirements of insulation. Adding a little bit more insulation isn't really much more expensive. Yes, triple glazed windows are more expensive than double glazed windows, although actually the market is swinging, and actually double glazed are becoming more expensive than triple glazed, because you only need them for retrofit where there's a weight issue or other things, and triple glazed are more cost effective, or were before Brexit and the pandemic. I don't know what the latest figures are with transportation across from Europe, which is where most of the triple glazed windows are made. But you also get savings. We're having a lot less plant, we're having a lot less radiators. You can put them where you want, you don't have to put them all the way. So there's ways to design the building to be more efficient, to be more cost effective. So it is really about trying to make those in that same magnitude. So there isn't very much difference. And I guess the one point I would say is the long-term costs. The Enterprise Centre at the University of East Anglia, I mentioned, we just looked back at the figures on that, and effectively we're saving the cost of the building 2.5 times in 60 years period. In energy savings compared to building the building to part L, 2.5 times the actual cost of the whole building, not the additional extra cost for making it. That's super good. The whole building, this is a phenomenal amount of money that people are spending on their buildings. If you can realize that, as you're saying, the savings overall, you build a higher performance building, it saves money. And the problem is, if we don't build it now, we're going to have to retrofit it, and that's what currently people are building. A lot of buildings which are not good enough and will have to be retrofitted in the next 10-20 years, which is going to be a real shame.
So we've still got 4 questions to deal with, and we've got just under 10 minutes. So I think if we can move on, I've got a character jury service in the top corner. I don't know what your name is. Do you want to tell us what your name is, or are you happy to be?
It's Tim. It's Tim Jury.
Tim. Oh, Tim Jury. Ah, okay, that explains it. Well, would you like to ask your question in person?
Well, I would. It's already down there, but essentially, just taking a second to look at all the questions that are being asked here. There are a lot of individuals, I think, or householders like myself, who have a lot of interest in getting specific information and advice about how to do these retrofits or amend or change or upgrade their houses. But there doesn't really seem to be a central point that people can go to for specific advice. There might be some general advice about how you do this, about how you do that. So I'm looking at the moment at insulating a part of my house, trying to get really good advice about which materials to use. I found it's been very difficult to get. I'm not sure whether people are recommending things because they stock them, or whether they stock them because they recommend them. So it's all about trust as well. Sorry, that was more of a diatribe than a question, but hopefully you see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think we do.
Yeah, Tim, that's what I've been doing for a living for 20 years now, but it's not free. So, if you want the impartial advice that cuts through all of that stuff that you're having problems with, that's effectively what I've been doing. But we now wrap that up in a local service rather than having it as as individual consultants you have to engage with. So our service for London is ecoferb.com, and you can engage with that scheme. And we always start with a whole house assessment. So,
okay, well, I think it will be really good if something like a local authority could maybe just start off by giving some advice, and maybe you could work with them. Just a thought. I don't know what the costs are, Russell, involved in this sort of stuff. So
yeah, it's pretty huge. That's why it doesn't happen anymore. It used to happen a lot. The Energy Saving Trust were funded for a while, but it's excruciatingly expensive. So that's why we've developed this app so that people can see the sort of things that they need to do, and design a service on the back of it. So we've had to find our own money to launch that Ecoferb scheme, so these are all investments we've made ourselves. So it's hard. If you're quite right though, if we want to get the entire country renovated, do we either take the Italian approach, and they're offering 110% grant funding now, So I'd love to see what the interest is on that. If you can't get everyone excited with 110% grant funding, what the hell's going to work? Or you pay for lots of advice. And there were energy advice hubs all over the country for a while, but it was millions upon millions of pounds to get that going. And you'll find that some people that are, my business partner used to run one of them, and he said the bane of his life was time wasters. That they weren't really that interested. They're just a bit bored, and they'd spend 2 hours on the phone with you. And that's our problem. Someone like you is the perfect customer, really, because you've already got a good idea of what you want, and you just want to ask if this one or this one, and in 5 minutes we'll probably be done. But setting up a service to do that, taxpayer funded, I think we're a long way away from that, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
I'd quickly add, I guess there are some not places where you'll get the detailed information you're wanting, but there are some guidance about examples and case studies. And the LETI, the Low Energy Transformation Initiative, they've released a retrofit guide a couple of weeks ago, and that gives some really good examples of what you should be aiming to get to, and some practical case studies of various different types of buildings that you can find out more research on. They won't give you answers to your specific questions on your specific house, but they'll give you a general indication of what sort of thing you're wanting. And then you can go to Russell or John or somebody like that and actually get say, this is the sort of thing that we're wanting.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's. I've got 2 more questions here which are specific, so I'm going to combine the 2 together, and then there's one more generic question at the end. The 2 questions I'm combining is: can you advise on how to insulate a solid concrete ground floor in a 1970s house, detached house? And also a question about external insulation. Can it cause condensation issues, and is this a common problem, and how can it be avoided? So one about obviously issues with condensation or loss of heat through the floor. The other one, having external insulation but causing condensation problems. So who wants to take that on? And just quick answers.
I will if nobody else will.
Well, they might.
The floor, solid floors are the hardest thing to tackle in any building, in any retrofit. You've got 2 options. One is to dig it out and start again. And the other one is to put a nice big fat carpet down on it. Or if you're feeling spicy, you could put an aerogel mat down as well underneath the carpet, which is quite expensive but will work. But again, I would hesitate to just give a generic answer there. The best way is to have a look at the house, have a think about how this thing works as a whole, because you don't want 2 different floor heights and then you're tripping up on your way into the kitchen with a nice lovely cup of tea. All that kind of stuff has to be thought about. And on the insulation side, I would imagine the question was really, you've heard that internal wall insulation on an external wall has caused condensation. And yes, it can if it's done badly, but not if it's designed properly and installed by a proper contractor. It can be a common problem if that happens. But external wall insulation on the outside of a solid wall, it won't cause condensation. In fact, it will do the opposite, provided it's installed well.
Okay, I think we'll take it at that. A last question. With all these options that we've got to make better buildings, what do you think is the main barrier that's stopping all new builds adopting low carbon design, especially as Christian says, it can be done for a very small additional cost? If we can get a response, particularly from Christian, I would think.
I mean, I think it's just a lack of skills and training in the industry. It's not anything else. It's more the risk and uncertainty of doing something different. Unfortunately, a lot of building work is managing risk, and if they haven't built it in a certain way to the way they've built it before, they don't want to do it. But I think that's the real challenge of pushing people to understand we've got to design things different to how we have for the last 50 years or whatever.
Either our other 2 panelists want to comment on that, or you?
I have no experience in new build at all, so I feel like a fraud.
Well, that's fine, no problem. We're running right up to the limit now of our time. We're just coming up to 8:30. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, obviously, for giving us their depth of knowledge and answering a few questions on the side as well, but particularly Sarah for organising the evening. I think it's been a pretty good success, and I've certainly enjoyed myself here, and I've learned a few things. As far as materials and that go, it's a minefield at the moment, but once that kind of slims down to regular products that we can actually see going into buildings, I think that'll make life a lot simpler. And the next few years will be very interesting, I think. But having said that, I hope you've enjoyed the evening. And there are things going on. I think you mentioned about building a Christian about tomorrow on the COP26 side of things. Do you want to say that again?
Yeah, so certainly you can log into the virtual pavilion and the website for the Build Better. Let me just find out what that one is. Should know off the top of my head. Here we go. The Build Better Now, the hashtag. That's basically the UK Green Building Council and others are pushing that as the hashtag for the COP26. Tomorrow is the Built Environment Day, so there'll be events up and down the country, and yeah, if you look on social media on those hashtags or on the website, you should be able to locate some events if you want to find out more.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. Anyway, unfortunately, we've got no more time, so all I can say is thank you and good night, and thanks again to Sarah and our speakers, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Night.
Thank you, Les.
You're
Bye
welcome.
now.
Thanks, Les.
Okay, bye now.
Thank you.
Les, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I really appreciate that. I'm really chuffed with how that went. I think
I think we had a good session there, didn't we?
yeah, it's
Difficult
good.
to get everybody's angling, but I mean, I
It
think
is.
people got covered, and I don't know whether Hillary is still there. Are you still there, Hillary?
Yeah, it's obviously quite a contrast actually, talking about the new and the retrofit. So there was a lot to cover. So well done managing the time and the questions, and hopefully people.
I think everybody got what they wanted out of it.
Yeah,
I certainly picked up a lot from the.
I did. Fab. All right. Have a lovely evening, and I hope I might speak to you again soon.
It's very, very possible. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.